Hey everyone, it's Tuesday. Welcome back. This week we are focusing on paintings of doors, and we're also only painting from life, so no photography this week. Last night's painting was a lot of fun. Today I'm also doing another painting at night, so bear with me. Hopefully I can keep up the energy and come away with a good finished painting by the end of today's session. So let's get to it. Okay, so for today's painting, we are actually doing another night painting. I couldn't get enough yesterday, so I'm going back at it, doing another night painting. And I'm also going to be focusing on a doorway again, but this time a different doorway in the house. This doorway is the doorway that divides the living room from the kitchen. And this particular passageway, doorway, has a nice transom window up above the door frame itself. And right at the top edge of the door frame, again, we are encountering that scallop trim that I am really digging in this house. So if you don't like scallop trim, sorry, but that's what this painting's going to be focusing on again. And you'll notice too, for the start of this painting, I have pulled out my measurement device, and it's a device that I haven't really shown in past videos yet, but it's a device that I love using, and I completely ripped it off from Antonio Lopez Garcia. I saw this video years ago of Lopez Garcia painting in a street in Madrid, doing one of his cityscapes early in the morning. And it's this kind of ridiculous video where there's this huge crowd surrounding him, watching him paint, and he keeps having to shoo them off because they keep getting in the way of what he's trying to see or what he's trying to measure. But in that video, you'll notice that he has this tool that he keeps bumping up to his cheekbone, right under his eyeball, that the first time I saw it, I was really intrigued. Like, what is that? And then I realized he was putting a compass up against the block that was attached to the end of this sort of stick-like tool. And what he was doing was taking really precise measurements at a set distance from his eye. I literally made the exact same tool, and I tried out different distances from my eye, and I think I settled on something about 24 inches long. And that ended up working out really well for me. And I've used this tool on and off since probably 2013 or so. And I've cycled through a lot of different measurement tools in my time of painting. The first tool is just the brush itself, just using the back end, the handle end of the brush, and taking measurements with your arm straight out and locked, and then transferring it to the canvas, either keeping the measurement straight up as is, or just simply using it to find relative proportions within the subject that I'm measuring on, and then maybe enlarging it or shrinking it down on the canvas, but maintaining relative proportions, but with a different unit on the canvas. So that's one way that I started out measuring. It got more complicated when I was in graduate school and wanting to take more specific measurements. I went through a whole series, actually, of different tests with measurements in grad school, where I was trying to capture the binocular nature of human vision to where I would show the eyes converging on what they were focusing on. Say, if I was painting a self-portrait, my face would be sort of in focus, almost like how a camera would focus in on a face and have a limited depth of field. But instead of the background and the foreground being blurry, what I was attempting to do was to show the amount of doubling that happens in the things in front of or behind your vision. And if that sounds confusing, it's really simple. We would play around with this concept as little kids when you put your two fingers in front of your face and then make them overlap in your vision until you get the floating hot dog. So that's basically what I'm talking about when I'm doing these experiments with binocular vision and having this sort of sense of doubling. But anyways, I digress. That has nothing to do with this particular painting. But it is a fascinating topic for me, this idea of human vision and doubling, and how weird. If we could have like an actual recording of what our brain is receiving as far as like what would you even call this? Video content. It would be a really weird looking image because we're so used to seeing images through the filter of the lens of photography or cinema cameras. And we're used to the idea of blur and depth of field, which our eyes have, but we're not used to the doubling effect that is our everyday experience of living our lives. And our minds have just totally become used to it since the day we were born. So there's nothing weird about it to us. But if we saw a video of what that actually looks like, it would be really, it would be really strange. Dare I say traumatizing? No, it wouldn't be traumatizing, but it would be really weird looking because everything would be super chaotic looking and doubled. So the lens would have to converge on an object, focus on an object, but then everything in the distance would literally be doubled. And the further away it was from the plane of focus, the more it would be doubled, or the greater the distance between the doubling. So that just has to do with the distance between our eyes. Our eyes are like, I don't know, 2.5, 3 inches apart from one another. I'm totally just guessing off the top of my head. But as your eyes both converge on something and focus on something, they keep going in the direction they're going, and things start to misalign the further you get from the plane of focus. So yes, that is a crazy idea and it's fun to talk about, but let's talk about this painting. So we're doing this night painting again, focusing on a doorway, and I'm choosing this particular doorway because I was really loving the whole diagonal action of this door frame when I looked at it from this sort of angle. So the shadows themselves are traveling down at a diagonal to the left, but the door frame itself is traveling down at a diagonal to the right when you take into account the perspective of looking at this doorway from, maybe a 45-degree angle or a 30-degree angle from straight on. So this is another one of those types of lighting situations that I love, where you get these drop shadows and it creates this sense of space, but also this really clean composition. It's not too complicated. It's really simple, yet it's showing the light fall off and drop shadows and color gradient shifting to darker and darker as things get further from our eyes or further from the light source, since the light source in this painting is basically right over my head. And this also creates a nice opportunity for color mixing. Since the painting is closer to the light source, it's getting more light than what I'm looking at, 10 feet in front of me or so. It allows me to match the values of the painting to what I'm seeing. And I honestly, if I'm being totally honest, I really favor making paintings where the values in the painting can match the values in the subject. And to accomplish that, you have to play around with lighting setups. So the lighting on the painting has to be brighter than the light on the subject. And this gets really complicated when you take into account reflective objects or objects that are like shiny and they punch back really hard highlights back at your eyes. You could say those get clipped in the process usually. But I've actually tried to even accommodate that in setups to where I have a lot of light on the painting and a little light on the setup if there's reflective objects, so that the highlights of the objects don't get clipped too harshly, so that there's a proper amount of contrast between the highlight. Say if I had like a reflective jar or some metallic object, some metal object or something, the contrast between the reflective highlight and the sort of local color next to it, the other reflective areas on it that are closer to the metal color or the mere local color of that object, it has enough contrast to really show the reflective quality of that object. And that all comes down to planning out the painting. Some painters would think I am crazy to do this, and they would much rather just look at what's in front of them and assess the overall value structure of what is in their vision, and then on their painting, they would just recreate a whole nother value structure in terms of relative values and not try to mix them to match what they see. But they would say, okay, I can see here's my brightest highlight, and I'm going to key that highlight into the painting. And then the next brightest thing is a number 2 on the value scale or something. So nothing else in the painting then is mixed to that level of brightness. And then you can kind of use that as a tuning fork for the entire painting and key the whole painting off of that. And this is exactly the way I work when I do landscape painting, because typically I'm facing towards the direction of the sun. So the surface of my painting is not getting direct sunlight on it, but the surface of the painting instead is technically in the shade since it's facing away from the sun. My painting surface is a lot darker than what I'm looking at. So I have to do this whole relative recalibration of all of the values. I can't just match what I see to what I have on the painting. But it would be really fun to have the painting facing away from the sun and the surface of the painting is getting direct sunlight. And then you could potentially just match the values straight up to what they need to be. I actually have never experimented with doing this. So maybe in the coming weeks, I'm probably going to do a week of landscape painting, and maybe I'll try this out as an experiment. I think it would be a good experiment for me. This gets into a topic that I think is really interesting with painting, and it's a form of thinking about painting that I use a lot. And what is that? To me, it's the relationship of vision and painting or visual art to music. In a situation like this, where we're talking about values and relative proportions of values, I really love to think about painting and its relationship to music. So, say within music, if you have a vocal track or a piece of music where there's an instrument that is really expressive and has a large gamut of amplitude or expressive volume, say a vocalist who is super loud at one point, and then they're singing very quietly, almost piano at another point. If you're trying to record a vocalist who is doing this, a lot of recording engineers would put a compressor on that voice. And what does that do? A compressor basically will do gain reduction on any part of that vocal track that goes above a certain threshold. It'll do a certain amount of gain reduction based on a ratio you set up. And if this sounds confusing, it just basically means all the really loud pieces of that vocal track get pulled back down as far as the gain or the amplitude of that vocal track or the loudness of it. It gets pulled down and stays within a predefined envelope of volume. So that's basically what it does. It sort of limits the ceiling of the volume. And I actually really love thinking about that idea with painting. So in a painting where you are looking at the full value range of a painting, light to dark, you can relate that to loudness in music. So sometimes with, say, like a night painting, I don't want it to ever get close to pure white. I want it to have a sort of cap where it only gets to maybe a 30% gray or somewhere in that range of value. And that's what I'm doing in this painting. I'm setting it up so that it doesn't get too bright. I never want it to get near to a full white paint, because then it would disrupt that quality of looking or feeling like a night painting. I want it to have that quality of interior light that's not super bright, and to have that sort of atmosphere of nighttime. If the whole thing is all washed out, it wouldn't have the same atmospheric effect. And it also might not give you the same emotional reaction when you see it. So if it's darker, you're going to start thinking of more dark, moody, atmospheric spaces. So that's what I'm going for with this. And I love to think about painting's relationship to music. And I'm totally just at the surface level of the relationships. I think there's so many other elements too. Brushwork, the materiality of a painting, how raw it is compared to how fine-tuned it is. You know, think of a painter like Bouguereau, who gets his pieces to an insane amount of resolution and resolve The technical proficiency and polish of a Bouguereau painting is like super high caliber. It's the violinist who spends years and years practicing a certain violin concerto or something until it is so dialed in and every texture and nuance is ironed out and the performance is going to be nearly flawless. Compare that violinist to, say, a fiddle player who's just playing an Irish folk tune, and the folk tune is really rough around the edges. You get the melody, but the overall approach is a lot more rough and raw and expressive in a totally different way. It's going to be a lot more like punk music compared to highly polished pop music that has layers of synth and layers of modulation and dynamic effects being applied to every single element of the music. Whereas punk music is just like plug in the amps, turn them up really freaking loud, and just start jamming out and play really fast and let all of your emotions out. So if Bouguereau is the super polished violin concerto, then maybe you have somebody more like Gwyn John who's doing more of like the folk music that's rough around the edges, and her brushwork is a lot more present and it's loose and it's right there in your face for you to appreciate all the textures and rawness of the materiality of the painting. So that's something that I love to think about in painting and think about its expressive qualities. So that was today's painting, or tonight's painting, you could say. And I think I handled the exhaustion a little bit better tonight, even though I stayed up until 1 or 1:30 finishing up this painting. Still, I was able to maintain a level of focus and a level of determination through the whole thing. And I didn't start feeling too worried about my level of exhaustion setting in and then me making bad painterly decisions. So thanks for hanging out. I'll see you all next time. Bye.